Thank you, Charlie.
We are now recording this. I'm Charlie Winterbauer. I'm co-chair of the Southeast chapter of the North Carolina Native Plant Society. And this talk is one of many talks that we are doing for the 2020 Native Plant Festival, which is usually a live event at the Arboretum in Wilmington. But because of the COVID, we are doing these all virtual and recording them and making them available. So with that, I turn you, oh, I know, I got to introduce Beth. This is Beth Sheppard. And Beth Sheppard has an MA in Environmental Studies Education, has operated a specialty landscape business for over 25 years. Her secret gardener approach has evolved from planning for instant gratification to working more holistically with individual landscapes which can preserve and embellish natural areas. So I will turn this over to Beth right now. Go ahead, Beth.
All right, thanks, Charlie. Thank you. So as I tried to prepare for this presentation, certainly it's a unique opportunity to do Zoom versus a live audience. But I appreciate that Charlie asked me to continue on with an idea. And as I was preparing for this, I recognized how lucky I am to be a gardener. The outdoor world has not been off limits for these past 6 months during COVID. There's been a lot more opportunity to pause and appreciate the beauty that we have in small spaces, large spaces. So it seems a valuable lesson for all of us in focusing on our ecology versus our ego. So what will drive the future for landscapers and home gardeners? So as I mentioned, I kind of came up with this theme of the ego versus echo, and how we design what we crave in our own backyard or a new project on a large scale. What's driving that? Are we thinking more about what seems neat and tidy, and maybe we think meets the criteria of a social norm, versus paying attention to what ecology desires from us and needs from us? So that's kind of what my focus will be on today. So starting with that, I want to just point out that that we're going to go branch out. What do I mean by that? I feel it's my responsibility as a landscaper to preserve habitat as best as I am able. The extremes can range from simply rescuing a small tree frog, or maybe if we're pruning on the job site and we find a bird's nest and we don't just charge on in, we respect that habitat, and we opt not to prune and give nature space. So maybe it's something as small as that to on a larger scale. I can advise a customer to leave a buffer on a larger scale, trees that will protect habitat, maybe avoiding disturbing the soil around an area that's on the wood's edge, and being able to point out specific species that are super valuable that a homeowner wouldn't know. So there's a lot of education involved, but sometimes I'll go on a property and get so excited because they'll have a thriving red bay, and I'll point out and say, oh, you have no idea, the red bays are suffering all over the southeast, and you have a healthy one. That's really important. Take good care. So just explaining the intrinsic value is a larger effort for preservation. So it does come back to awareness and education and deciding what's worth it. So I made this little graph of saying that everything's sort of interconnected, that by helping encourage some alternative planting as a landscaper, I can then help lead a homeowner or client into being able to have a project that will ultimately need less pruning. I'm not ever suggesting there will be no maintenance. all landscapes, if you want to have them under any kind of control, will require some work, but definitely less pruning if you're doing more natives. And that allows a homeowner to then have an opportunity for more time for just observing, to observe what comes. When you put in alternative plants and you have native species that invite in pollinators, then watch what happens. Watch the bird activity that you will encourage and enjoy that. Definitely during COVID, the statistic is probably huge. Probably Audubon has great numbers on telling us how much more bird watching was taking place as more people were working from home and paying attention to the backyard. So it really gets down to what's your starting point as a homeowner or someone that comes forward with a project. What's the starting point for them? As many of you know, over the past 25 years, we've had over 10 major hurricanes right here in Wilmington, North Carolina. I'm lucky, to be able to, I feel grateful that nothing catastrophic has happened to our home or our family, and unfortunately not everyone can say that. But from a landscaper's perspective, the aftermath of a hurricane, it can be quite depressing. Even this year, I think maybe none of us expected a hurricane species to be serious, and it meant that when there was destruction, it just felt extra challenging. And when you go to properties and see that beautiful specimen trees have been erased from home sites, the process of rebuilding can be a long, expensive, and painstakingly slow process. So again, as a landscaper, it's up to us to keep that wheel rolling. I don't have time to linger over, being sad. There's needs that are out there. So we start with what the need is. Then the client can express what that need would be, and we'll go on the property and do an evaluation. So we'll evaluate the site for sun or shade, soil condition, pollution, if they're in the city or out further out in the county, and so if they are able together, we collaborate to make a plan. Okay, so we go from the initial need, to then evaluating, to then collaborating and making a plan. And once we plan, we will probably discuss specific plants. And that's a fun part, right? Everybody likes that part. The challenge begins here. So this is where our attitude toward natives really comes into play. We might discuss them with a homeowner. We might make our suggestions and make our pitch, like, you really ought to include more beautyberry, or leave these feather bush in the back buffer of your property. They're great, they're evergreen, and provide cool flower panicles for pollinators in the spring. We can say all of that, but when it gets down to the day of planting, I think the challenge we have is that if the availability is not there, then things don't happen, even with the best of intentions. So if specific varieties aren't there and we can't easily substitute, then the next thing we know, we're using cultivars that are at the nursery. It's a sad truth. It's a sad truth, and Charlie and I have talked about it. There's plenty of efforts being made to expand the native plants propagation. They do not grow easily on the nursery sites. And if the shopping's not easy for a landscaper, it's likely not going to happen. So that's what brings back the responsibility, the feature of it, that this responsibility that we need to take time to seek out the better selection of plants, and even maybe include the homeowner in doing the shopping so they can appreciate the task at hand. But online shopping is very effective. Depends on the region of whether we're looking for a native plant that's going to need for coastal settings, or whether they're more closer to the Piedmont in terms of soil and availability. So if nothing else, that we then go from the planting, we can also slide from that planting time into protecting. That's another crucial job we have as landscapers. We have a lot of control on the job. We're the ones that are out there deciding whether or not, like today, I even was thinking, it's my call whether I decide to say, this little Eastern red cedar seedling, is it going to be in the way later? And so do I pull that up here now, or do I say, let's leave that on the job and let's protect it and give it a chance? So we have that much control. Most homeowners leave it up to a landscaper or a maintenance crew to determine what stays and what goes. So just a kind of a joke of the saying, welcome to my world, but not all job sites come with a plan. There are occasions, I just use this as an example, where this might be what I see when I'm invited out to a job site first day, and it's kind of heartbreaking, because I think of all the potential of what could have been done differently if I had known and had an opportunity to help the owner ahead of time. So not all job sites come with a plan, and that limits, that therefore limits what you're able to do. But despite these challenges, I appreciate the opportunity to turn some of these variables into a manageable, user-friendly space. So not everyone is going to be ready for living without a lawn. We just can't expect all homeowners to have that. But we can, little by little, encourage the use of native grasses. Like here as an example, instead of putting in a line of shrubs that would need pruning, we use the pink muley grass to discourage any kind of runoff from the pool that they installed. We have a gravel base along there. Keeping the planting really simple meant that there's not going to be a tremendous amount of pruning needed on this job site. And as other talks for the Native Plant Society will concur, we definitely want to pick plants that require less water and less pruning. Doesn't mean that they won't need either of those things. Certainly all plants, when they're beginning to be established, require some care, some love and attention. Some of my favorites to talk about, though, I'm trying more and more in the tree category to encourage people to use persimmons, native to our region. The black gum is another great tree. It grows relatively fast, has cool foliage change color from a green to a little bit of a scarlet red. And the bark itself on the black gum is really smooth and attractive. And then the sweet bay magnolias are another tree choice that grow well in our region, can take that heavy clay, wet, poorly drained soil sites, and they can have nice multi-stem characteristics, so that they can replace the use of a river birch, as an alternative. Other plants just running through the list would be like the yuccas, for some place that really doesn't have any irrigation and they can be drought hardy. The fetterbush, as I mentioned before, is not something that I can seem to find in a nursery setting, but if I find it on the job site, I really try to protect that on site and point out to the homeowner that it's a good keeper. And then we have the beauty bush, the woodlanders variety. is not the native cultivar, but it does really well. Then we have crossvine and the red honeysuckle. All these bring some color and certainly bring in the fall action from the hummingbirds. The sweet spire does not always love a hot, dry sand, but can do well if we have a little bit of canopy, shade canopy, and tree cover. Iteas, the cultivar that I use, it is easy to find in the nursery, is Henry's Garnet. And then the panicum grass is one of my favorites because they can anchor in for soil erosion control. They can take wet soil, dry soil. And again, the seed heads are really popular for bird and insects. And again, we have the Yopon hollies, great for our coastal regions, can tolerate wind and salt spray. We have other grasses. And if it's a wooded setting and ferns, I enjoy ferns. And the autumn brilliance is, again, a cultivar, but species that I think does well for our area. So again, just reiterating that as we work through projects, we want to make sure we're selecting plants that can tolerate the site conditions, whether it be heavy salt spray or soil that does not drain well, or dry open shade. The other real push I feel like is that native plants can look cool. We don't always have to think that they're going to look rangy. It seems to be a misconception about them, but they can have ecological benefits. They restore ecosystems. They can increase biodiversity. And as we know, they provide habitat. They're hardy and they can help filter stormwater. And once you're established, they're low maintenance and require minimal irrigation. So this picture I took down at a year ago down at New Hanover County Public Library in the outside garden. And I just love that they took a big space and opted to not fill it with shrubs that were going to require pruning. They are not going to have to mulch, a big square footage of an area. They're just letting this mountain mint do its job. And that's so satisfying to see. This is one of my favorites. Maybe again, it goes back to that observation part of my wheel, that we can have more time for observation and find small pleasures when we educate ourselves. So this is called bear's foot. You can find it along kind of dry fields. In my case, I find it along the ditch bank near my house. And the leaves grow up, almost makes you think it's going to be like a sycamore tree by the size of the leaf. And then it gets this really pretty bright yellow flower in the fall. In this slide, I wanted to be sure to point out that when I took the photograph, that the petals are chewed on. The leaves have holes in them. And that's learning to recognize that's part of the beauty, right? It's providing fodder for the insects that we want to keep in our ecology. So again, this was another sample of what they planted in the design at the New Hanover County Public Library. A mix of grasses and perennials, big swaths, right? So even though all year round it might not be in full bloom, it's providing a space that it's reducing pollution because you're not running equipment that's gas powered. There's less need for chemical herbicides, and the community of these plants. That's the other key factor, is that the community connectedness of one plant's roots next to the other is going to mean that there's less watering required. So, and when we think about planting, if you had a space that you were brave enough to give over to, like maybe a big wildflower meadow, one of the main things we want to suggest is that you just leave it dormant. So when we hit late fall and things do look tired and dried out, more and more we want to educate homeowners to know that that's got its own potential housing for a lot of pollinators that winter over in woody stems. Um, some of our birds and insects will still feed off of the seed heads, even though things look dried out. So the key is to let these fields stay uncut until maybe really early spring, maybe for us February or March. And then you do a one-time cut, and then you allow, then you can mow it maybe once with like a weed trimmer, give it a little fertilizer, an organic type of fertilizer, and then just let it go for another year. Okay. And that's just an example again that another way where things can take care of themselves. We certainly know with the beautyberry, just let the birds plant it for you. And for all the time and effort we're trying to promote and sell this idea of the natives, and let's really respect the visitors who get to come. So again, on the mountain mint, it's just I captured this in my backyard. I'm not an entomologist, but is that not a beautiful flying pollinator, like a wasp with such pretty blue wings? And the other visitors that will come to our plants, there's persimmon leaf, writing spider, golf filbert. And so during the pandemic, taking pause, right? I think that's a lot of the key words, pausing in our own backyard. This isn't a great picture, but I was just so entertained this summer when I had counted 32 black swallowtail caterpillars on my one brown spindle, and I tried to net it to protect the birds, protect them from being eaten by the birds. I certainly have seen a lot of butterfly activity a month or so after I saw them, but I'm sure it was a balance of some being eaten and some surviving. But that's an example, like why do we do it? What's the reward? We're talking about the challenges of going against the norm of what we're putting in our gardens, or taking out things that didn't really serve a function. And what's the reward? It's, if we can't be excited about seeing this kind of activity, I don't know. It's almost as good as TV. So the question is, what lengths will you go to? Like, how much branching out are you open to do, following our ego-driven landscape that's been such a part of our culture in the past, where we like to keep things neat and tidy? Or can we branch out and maybe reinvent what landscape means for us, small spaces or large spaces? We definitely need to know that it's not just about us anymore. We really have to dedicate some territory for the benefits of our wildlife habitat. So hopefully people will little by little have enjoyed gardening this year and won't forget the satisfaction that comes. Thank you. I have a page here of just some resources, and I think Charlie's gonna put up a book that's really great, that does a nice job of listing a lot of native pollinating plants. Thanks very much. Have a great season. Bye.
So we'll leave that up for a bit. And if people want to copy that down or note that, so it's time people get a piece of paper and write those down. While Beth was talking, I thought of another book, a second book that I want to show. So we have probably some people are just beginning or very interested in natives or gardening, and to that end, I would call this book
Yes.
kind of a beginner book. It's Gardening with Native Plants of the South, and I have a hard time showing the name of person, Sally Wazowski. So if you just if you go to Amazon and Google that name, you'll come up with it. The second book might be for more people more advanced. Larry Mellenchamp has a relatively new book out, and he calls it the Southwest Native Plant Primer. And Larry Mellenchamp, Mellichhamp. And again, you can Google that or you can Amazon it and you'll find that book. So with that, I'll close, and I thank you all for watching this and hope to see you sometime.
Yeah. Thank you for putting this together, Charlie.
My pleasure.